when I met you, this was I think a year ago. You were, I think, in the early stages of like planning out and developing your startup Scholar. Um, can you tell me more about that and sort of like what it is?
Yeah, yeah. First off, thank you for having me. I feel kind of honored to be one of the first few guests because we have so many cool people within the Novus community. I'm like, I don't know, I just feel like special. Yeah, I mean, Scholar, it's kind of like the first startup that I really ever tried tackling. Um, I, I had experience working at other startups before. So I worked at two other startups before, did that for like 2.5 years, and I kind of wanted to start doing my own thing. And I was very much just like exploring ideas, like what I could actually do in this domain, like what product I could build, what impact I could have. And I mean, I ended up getting exposed to some ideas that people were putting out in like fixing science, fixing how like the sclerotic state that science and like academia is in. There's really like quite a lot of issues there. And so yeah, I kind of got exposed to those problems as well as some like potential ideas for how we could solve that, and leveraging a lot of like technology that we have today. Specifically the internet, the fact that computers have proliferated, some like crypto blockchain stuff as well too. And so Yeah, I just decided to try giving it a shot, because there was like one specific individual who was putting out a lot of like very specific ideas on what I could do there. And so yeah, that's kind of like I put out a demo, got in touch with him, and kind of just like went at it from there. Yeah.
I'm really curious. Well, first of all, how did you, I guess, find your way to these um, ideas and how did you just form your thinking around, well, like this is the state of the industry, this is the actual problem.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting because actually I think when I initially
what is the problem?
okay, yeah.
If
So
if 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 you could phrase it.
um well, the problem was just the state of like scientific research. It's really quite like bureaucratic. The way that funding works, it's very, very risk averse. Whereas like in science, you kind of want to take like those risky bets on like those like edge of the distribution ideas, because those are the ones that like maybe actually have an impact. There's also just like the state of publishing, the state of scientific publishing. It's really quite like sclerotic. There's a lot of fraud that gets published that is just like really not that well known to the general public, just because the incentives for researchers are to like get publications out there, get published in some prestigious outlet, accumulate citations, because it is prestige and citations that are almost like the currency of science. It's how a researcher or an academic's career is weighted almost. And if as a PhD student, if you don't get published, if you don't accumulate citations, it's actually really hard to progress within the research industry. And so it's kind of like this like ecosystem that has slowly like degenerated over time. I think there was a time where like it was really like these exact same institutions, these exact same structures, were really quite good and they did their job well. But I mean, it's almost just like the nature of the universe, entropy. Just like if you don't have like people keeping the system aligned on actually doing good, it just like slowly gets a little bit more chaotic and gets misaligned with things. And so the actual like root of the problem that I was trying to tackle was so a lot of like scientific research is really measured in like prestige and citations. Those are almost like the currency of that. And I was trying to take like a very first principles perspective on this of like, oh, so these were the institutions that were set up in the industrial age. They were perhaps optimal for that world. What would be optimal for like an internet age of things?
Uh, so one of our cameras cut out, but we're back now. So we were talking about mentioned Balaji Srinivasan, um, the person who you reached out to and invested in your project. How did so and you mentioned that a lot of the ideas behind scholar came from a lot of his thinking. So yeah, I guess just, if there's anything else kind of like you want to elaborate on there. Uh,
I mean, yeah, I think that's like um, it's like pretty much it. Basically, what I was trying to do was like reimagine research publication from first principles, because the question was, or the like, yeah, the question that I was trying to answer is like, yeah, what would you do if you reimagined research publication from like first principles, and uh, like kind of create like a new incentive structure that didn't just value like prestige and citations, but maybe valued something different, like replications as well too. Because like a lot of people were hating. It's like very easy to hate on an old system. It's very hard to build up a new system that's like maybe better or at least like comparable to the new system. And so yeah, that was basically what I was trying to do. That's like the meta vision of like what I was trying to tackle. Yeah, I can elaborate from there or
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, so you wrote a few blog posts about the vision of scholar and your intentions with that. And I think the way that you phrased it there was, uh, yeah, just this whole idea of like um, replication instead of citation. So like, yeah, I guess kind of maybe expand on that idea a little bit, and why does that make sense, and how are you thinking about it?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, this is also one of Balaji's ideas. He has this one-liner. He always has these like really great, like catchy one-liners. But I think the way that he put it was, science is about independent replication, not prestigious citation. And if you actually this actually like makes sense if you understand what science is, right? Like going back to like Newton's laws, or just these like uh all these like scientists that everybody's like really well like aware of. How do you know that these like theories that they put out are true? How do you know that gravity is something that exists? Is because like I pick this up, I drop it, and like it actually falls. Like there is some sort of force pulling it down, right? The reason why we know that like gravity is something that exists in the world is because everybody can independently verify that it actually exists. And like this has kind of been like the nature of science for some time, that like back in the world, like um pre like 1900s maybe, when it was basically like independent scholars who spent their free time just like exploring like the frontier of science and trying to understand the universe. What they would do, they would like maybe have their like labs at home where they would experiment with something. And if they made some discovery, what they would do would share the information on the discovery with other researchers so that they could actually like verify it for themselves, right? That is actually like the basis of what science was been about for some time. But I think we've like strayed very far away from that state, with the current way that like science is done and the current way that like our institutions for science are structured. The like we seem to value things like prestige, we seem to value things like citations a lot more than replications. And you see this like really concretely where like a lot of highly cited research papers end up just being completely fake. They just don't replicate at all. Like there was a recent case where I think 16 years of Alzheimer's research was based off of one study. Like that's billions and billions of dollars getting allocated off of one study. And it's obviously been cited a lot, right? And what got found out recently was that somebody actually tried to replicate that work, and it just didn't replicate. And so that's just like one example of things that happen like all throughout the research ecosystem. And so yeah, the idea was is that like hey, maybe rather than like valuing research based off of how prestigious it is, or like how prestigious the journal that it gets published is, or how highly it gets cited, maybe we can value it based off of how like replicable or reproducible it is. And the like thesis that I was going off of is that it seems like this is directionally where science may go in the future. If you think of like just like with the nature of technology and everything, if you think of some research fields like computer science or machine learning, like how do you know that the recent machine learning paper, where I don't know, like OpenAI put out GPT-4 and it has like X performance on this benchmark. How do you know that that is legit? How do you know that that's replicable? Because you can actually run the code yourself, right? Like you can actually like the API is open. Like maybe the code is published as well too. Like you can actually independently verify that yourself. And so the way that I conceptualized it was that, hey, maybe like these computer science machine learning research fields are how the future of all how all research looks. Because like currently, yes, you can really just like computationally reproduce and replicate just only like computer science and machine learning research. But I think if you take like robotic labs, if you take like humanoid robots and all that stuff seriously, then it seems like our interface to science becomes like increasingly digital, and like much more of the scientific process actually just looks like automation and like very deterministic. And so in that world, like I don't know, maybe you discover some um I don't know, I can't think of like a good example, but like maybe like reproducing and replicating results looks more than looks less like you going to a lab and trying to do it versus just like telling some um like automated laboratory to go out and like replicate it. Yeah, so that was like the general idea that like this is the direction that research is going. Like maybe we can build up and bootstrap applications as an alternative and better metric for how you can gauge the quality of research, and like push for that as an alternative. Yeah.
I'm curious if you have any theories on how we got to this kind of point where you have scientific institutions with misaligned incentives and a lot of corruption and bad science that ends up getting produced.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like the whole thing about prestige that you mentioned, like how do we end up with that system? Because you're right, in a lot of ways it is counter
Mm-hmm.
to the actual uh, like science of it, right?
Yeah. Even on like yeah, so I guess like both like prestige and citations are kind of the things that I'm like tackling on. Citations specifically, I know that at the time there was I'm forgetting his name, but I think it was Eugene something. Around like the 1950s and 60s, they were so basically like at a level like all these. I'm talking about these problems and I'm talking about these issues, but I think at the time that they were implemented, they were actually good and they were actually needed, which is why we actually implemented them. But I just don't think that we've done a proper like double check or like we've kind of just like let the system run on autopilot. And it's like like Goodhart's law, like any metric or what is it? Any measure that becomes a target ceases to be a good measure. It's like kind of one of those things where yes, at the time, like Eugene Garfield actually pushed for the broad adoption of citations as a measure for the quality of scientific research because this was around the 1950s 60s era, where we were actually setting up things like the National Institute for Health Research, the National Science Foundation as well too. So we're really scaling up science with the help of like the weight of the U.S. government and the amount of capital that it had, and like really allocating that towards basic research. And so it needed to scale, of course, right? We needed to scale this system and this ecosystem as a whole. And so Eugene Garfield, yeah, he pushed for citations as like the best measure that we have at this time. In the actual original like article where he talked about this proposition, he even mentioned the fact that like this is obviously not optimal. Ideally, we would like individually verify this research. Ideally, we would independently replicate it, but we just don't have like the technology. It's just not feasible today. Um, and this is like the best thing that we have at the time, right? And so yeah, it was like broadly implemented, and like journals adopted it as well too. And it just doesn't seem like um, we've been able to like go back and like double check like is this really what we want now, like is this really the best optimal way to measure science in today's world, or maybe there might be something else. um I don't have like strong thoughts on prestige, but those are like my thoughts on like citations itself as well too. I think the other thing I would probably mention is we also had many like physical world constraints um, in the time when we were scaling up scientific research in like the 1900s. Like we didn't have the internet, this like very high bandwidth communication medium, where you can literally send like gigabits of data to people. You're very much constrained on the amount of information that you could present, which is why research was published in journals like as like physical paper. You had like specific sections where you talked about your methods and everything. um like that was just like optimal for that world where you had that communication bandwidth limit, but we obviously don't have that communication bandwidth limit today. So why are we still publishing research in the same like PDF format? And like obviously the counter argument to that is that like you have people publishing like code and data, but I mean for a lot of research fields you actually don't still. Um, and yeah, I think it's just like it's just the nature that we just set up these institutions in that age, and we just haven't like readjusted them to today's world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned that you initially started with kind of like machine learning research, AI research. If you do it all on the computer, then you can easily just run the code and replicate it. Um, but the kind of like the eventual vision was to scale it to um, like as many fields as possible. And so, like, what's your picture of, for example, like, how do you picture this working in a field that requires a lot of work in the physical world? Maybe requires a lot of advanced equipment to do the experiment. Um, what's that gonna be like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for like a lot of research, it's going to be hard to fully automate it, especially a lot of like psychology research and stuff like that. Especially where you have like human subjects that you need to test it on,
That
or like
also,
maybe you need like a large hadron collider to actually like do an experiment. Like not everybody has the resources to replicate that. Um, I think like that's it. That's definitely like a constraint on this like idea slash vision that like it's actually not feasible to fully replicate a lot of research. Although I think like it's still useful even in those scenarios to aspirationally like be able to reproduce and replicate as much of the research as we possibly can. So even if like you can't run the full physical world experiment, and like fully re-replicate that, maybe at least just having the like that like code and the data available and being able to just like reproduce those figures that people show and like the results that people show and those charts and tables in the PDFs is still useful. It sounds like such a simple thing to be honest, but it's really quite like it's not really that done. Like people don't really share their data that's like underlying those figures, and so like a lot of the time people will sometimes even just like steal an image, steal an or a chart from a different research paper and just paste it onto their thing, and it looks legit. Like it looks legit for the most part, so it gets past peer review. It ends up getting published. So even just like having that data, having that code available, so you can at least like look at it and like maybe create your own like distribution charts and get a sense for like the legitimacy of it is still useful, even if we can't like fully replicate that research. That's still like useful to move in that direction and like, aspire towards that,
yeah,
if that
yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like in the future, I guess if I had to imagine this working at least to some extent, maybe not with something like a multi-million dollar like particle accelerator, but
Mm-hmm.
with kind of more like basic, let's say for example, like biology tools or something,
Mm-hmm.
um, getting that stuff out of the universities and making it kind of open for for any sort of researcher to use might be an interesting kind of avenue there. It also makes me think of, well, maybe with the advent of like um, automation and robotics, you could probably do something there kind of like when it comes to replication of a certain experiment. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I think,
there's directions this can go. I think if you
yeah,
want to scale it to
yeah,
the physical world as well.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And like, I mean, that the point that you mentioned, where I think like a lot of research has historically kind of been very Western dominant, and a lot of the institutions, a lot of the prestige, a lot of the weight of like the scientific research ecosystem is kind of held by Western institutions, but it does seem like there's a lot of other countries that seem to be like stepping up to the plate and rising up, like India, a lot of Southeast Asian countries, even like China, especially too. I've talked to a lot of researchers, even in Latin America as well too, who they're very interesting. They seem to be at like the frontier of the research space. But just the sheer fact that like everything is so Western dominant, and it makes this assumption that you're already in the Western world, and that like I don't know, you can get published in a Western journal outlet. It's very much constraining, and like it's like a barrier to entry almost. And so opening it up beyond that is still useful. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so you have this idea, and how what is the product that you build, and how does that happen, and like how do you get your initial kind of prototyping or validation for your idea?
Yeah, so this is actually the thing that like I struggled with the most on this startup, to be honest. Like I got exposed to these ideas because like Baldi was putting them out. It seemed compelling enough for me to at least like want to try it. At the very best, like I end up building like a scalable company. At the very worst, I try something and fail, but at least I like I get like Balaji's name at least. Um, that like he's backed one of my companies before. And like initially when I got exposed to the idea, I basically spent months like talking to as many researchers as I could, reading up about the state of the ecosystem and like trying to get a feel and like an understanding of it for like as best as I could. And I think that actually contributed to why he chose to fund me. But I mean, in terms of like product, I don't like I tried a bunch of ideas. I was initially trying to build like I think when we first met, I was initially trying to build a tool that just made it easier to reproduce results in machine learning and computer science. And the hypothesis was that like okay, you build that, you get it used more broadly by computer science and machine learning researchers, and you kind of bootstrap um, this reproducibility metric within this field, show that it has like some sort of weight, some sort of like um, better approximation to the quality of the research than prestige and citations, and so you maybe get some adoption there, and then you can scale it out from there. Um, I didn't really like take that far because I realized it was much more of like a technical challenge to actually make that work. So I tried exploring like a different direction. More recently, actually, I started exploring in the realm of like AI LLM evaluation. But I don't know. I think I like eventually reached this point very recently where I think like this vision has a lot of weight and a lot of potential if you can make it work. But I just don't seem like I have like the enough knowledge within the space to make it work, or like maybe I just don't have the capability to make it work. I think it's at this point where I realize some people talk about this idea of like founder market fit, that like you actually need to um, like yes you need a founder who can like build and can build a product that gets product market fit, but also the founder needs to be a good fit for the market. And I think the thing that I realized is that like yes I've kind of tackled this problem, but I don't have enough of like um, maybe like a deep understanding of like the research field. Like I have like a meta understanding of it, but not enough of an understanding of like machine learning research or like deep CS research or like deep biology research, as well as like a deep enough passion to like work on this problem, that I don't think like the founder market fit was like there enough for me to continue working on it. So yeah, I am like
Mhm.
working on something new. Maybe you'll see something soon.
Okay, 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 okay.
Yeah. Um, but I mean, I can talk about like my learnings of that and my like experience working on this too. But yeah, I never really like hit a point where I found a product that could actually help to scale on this vision.
Yeah.
Obviously learned a lot from that experience. So
The thing you mentioned with founder market fit,
yeah.
I I feel like is really good insight. And I mean, like, I think for kind of technical expertise or expertise in the field, potentially one thing you could do is bring on somebody who is an insider and who has deep knowledge
Mm-hmm.
of this field. But I think like it's the maybe to me kind of what stands out as an even more important factor is the other thing you mentioned, which is just like being you have to be really passionate about the problem.
Yeah.
Um, but then again, there it's like I think you're always really passionate to start working on something in the beginning, and then as you build out the product and it becomes harder and harder, then it's it's hard to maintain that that level of passion. So I'm not sure. Like, there could also be a thing there where people they're passionate about things, um, but it's almost like like you have to make it through the kind of the hard part of it, and it's like the the difficulty of it turns people off, as opposed to like the actual passion, but it feels like passion. Um, I'm not suggesting that this is like the case in your case, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just like I feel like there's a like a like an interplay between, like it, it becomes really difficult to stay passionate about something when the challenge gets more and more difficult.
Yeah, you need a strong like internal motivator to persevere through the downtimes, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I think the other thing that might be useful to mention too is that like I was kind of executing on this like very grand vision, or like this like strategy, this plan that like somebody else had laid out, and like I worked on it to the I literally like tried my best, like I really like poured a lot into it. But even like personally myself, I couldn't see like a good way to actually like enter the market, get some scale, and really like scale out to execute on this vision. And so that was also like a loss of motivation for myself too. Is like if I don't see this actually like going somewhere, like why would I continue working on it? It's been like a really great learning experience. Like the way that I think of it, I feel like the like angel investment that I got was basically my startup education costs
yeah,
that like he paid for. That
yeah.
like I was basically I got free reign to make all the first time founder mistakes, um, and I learned a lot. And now I feel like for my next venture, I have like a better understanding of what to actually do right. Obviously, I'm gonna make a lot of mistakes, but it's like it's been useful from that perspective to, yeah, just like learn a lot. Yeah.
One thing you mentioned, and I've had this problem as well with my projects and startups that I've tried doing, is bridging the gap between the vision, the kind of like big, North Star vision, and specific product market fit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is the specific product of it? Because I think, well, for me, and I think this is the case for you as well. You want to work on problems that are motivating and that feel important, and that are kind of, if you can actually come up with a solution to the problem, it changes the world in a really big
Mm-hmm.
and fundamental way.
Yeah.
But then, like, it's a really long way from that to product market fit. Um, have you kind of learned anything about that process? Do you have any insight on that? Because it's, the easy thing, I think, for a lot of people to do, or the relatively easy thing, is just not have a grand vision at all and
Mm-hmm.
just find specific product market fit
Mm-hmm.
and serve that market. And that's what I find a lot of companies do. Even, like the top companies in YC, they might be like extremely successful, but um, most of them um, don't have this kind of like grand vision that they're motivated by. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, like, how do you actually build that kind of like has both of those things in it, and it reconciles the two?
Yeah, it's interesting because like I think like there's you can kind of put most founders on some sort of spectrum between these two. Like either they're a little bit too visionary and not practical enough to find like a path to execute on that vision, or they're like a little bit too practical and not like visionary or ambitious enough to be able to like or to want to execute on a grand vision. Um, I mean, I think there's some really good examples of people who have been able to execute on grand visions while also find like scalable paths up towards that by actually building like products and iterating with the market. And so like I think it's definitely feasible. I think like for me, I have like this temperament where I don't want to work on something if I'm not going to be globally competitive on it. If I don't see it scaling to like the entire world, or just like completely monopolizing or taking over some market and like having a really big impact, I don't want to work on it. I just get very bored of it. And so I think that like that just is my temperament. And so this is why like I mainly just choose to work on visionary things. Um, Although I think I like going back to like that spectrum, I am like very much, or I think I was for like a long time, like way too much on the visionary side and not practical enough. And I think this experience working on this initial startup has made me realize that I need to be a lot more pragmatic and just focus on like the raw economics of like getting something going, if I want to execute on some grand vision. Although I think like I'm kind of like opinionated in this sense where like I still feel like a lot more people would benefit from working on more ambitious things.
Yes.
Like I feel like people are I don't know, they're almost like underselling themselves, or they just don't think that it's possible, so they work on something that um is local. They see like the pure, like they see like the economic opportunity in it, they see like the market. It's almost like a little bit more easy and comfortable to tackle. It's definitely like I don't think most people have the temperament or like the risk budget to like really tackle these like grand visions that like don't have maybe a high probability of success, and like also the like technical and like the pragmatism to really execute on them. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I still feel like I always see like these founders, whether they're in YC or like maybe even like locally or something, where I just feel like they would benefit from being just a little bit more ambitious. Um, that yeah, that's just like a thought that I've had running in the back of my mind for some time. But yeah, I definitely have like more of a temperament to just like tackle ambitious things. I don't think everybody should be like me. Like I think it's useful to have people who are a little bit more, much more pragmatic for sure. But I think yeah, ambition and vision is useful to have, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Um, but is there like, I wonder if you could cultivate that ambition in any way. Um,
Yeah, I think
it
it's
feels like a lot
yeah.
of people are the way they are. Then again, I don't know. There is some, some play obviously
Mhm.
in your perspective on the world and just how you approach things.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't
like
know. Well, what's your perspective on that?
even like Sam Altman like talks about this, where with YC founders, with founders that he sees, he always pushes them to be a little bit more ambitious. Just like go for the big opportunity. Actually, there's actually a lot of entrepreneurs who talk about this. That just like a startup is hard enough, you might as well go after a big opportunity. And yeah, like maybe it is useful for people who have a lot of like political capital within the startup space, just by the sheer fact that they've succeeded. It probably is useful for them to advocate for more ambition, and like push people to be more ambitious.
So have mentors basically that like encourage people to like punch above their weight and to notice where somebody's maybe selling themselves short, and not, maybe like incorrectly, like, um, you know devaluing their potential, or
Yeah, exactly. And like
whatever it is.
maybe we can do some of that with Novus too. That like encourage our members to be a little bit more
I think
ambitious
so.
with their ideas. Yeah,
I think so.
let's get it.
One thing that I also, I think, might be um, interesting for people to learn is just like, how did that biology connection come about, and how, just in general, I guess, how do you um, approach a person who's prominent in some kind of industry, uh, uh, and who, you're trying to get the attention of, and have that actually work out, like how do you make that ask, and
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, like for me, what I did was he basically just went on this podcast, where he talked about these ideas. It was like an hour and a half long podcast where he talked about like the problems with the science, a potential better state where replications are valued more than citations. And at the end of the podcast, he actually had an ask of like, hey, if you're a builder in this space, build this specific MVP, and like show it to me. And so that's basically what I did. I made some connections with some guy who was already within the space. And so he sent that podcast to me and he was like, hey, there's a call to action at the end. And so I basically like took that. I did two things. One was to just like get his attention initially. where I created a summary Twitter thread of like the whole podcast. And he ended up retweeting that and then DMing me of like he said great thread or something like that. And that was like I guess useful to get his attention. And then from there, I told him that I was like working on this prototype. And yeah, I mean, I spent like a week just like really grinding on it. I built it out. I just sent it over to him. And then he ended up retweeting it or like just basically like tweeting about it on his main Twitter feed and then like directly messaging me and being like, hey, do you want to start a company? Like message me on WhatsApp. And that's kind of where the conversation started going.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of like meta thoughts on this. Like there's a lot of things that pop into my head. Like one is that I think the extent to which these uh, like these people are accessible online is really not like priced in or valued enough. Like especially Balaji, he's somebody who definitely checks his Twitter DMs a lot. And if you send him something interesting, I'm pretty sure he'll check it out. Um, I think the other thing too that I did was almost like I arbitraged it almost, where I think I realized that he was somebody with like obviously a lot of like political and like financial capital who wanted to see something in the world exist, but the actual like that was almost like the supply side or that was the demand side. And then in terms of supply, there just weren't that many founders who were working on X who had the ability to execute on X. And I mean, this is something that Liju talked about in his episode too, of like um, looking where other people aren't looking. Like there's usually like a lot of untapped opportunity in those domains. And that's kind of part of the reason why I even tackled the scientific industry more broadly too, is because there was all this innovation in all these other fields, and it seemed like science was ripe for disruption, and like maybe there's some opportunity here. And then even like specifically on this, like he put out this podcast that thousands of people saw, and I was basically the only person that really like built and sent this demo to him, even though like there was a clear call to action there. And so yeah, going back to that point, like he obviously he there was like demand for something to exist, and then basically my job, if I wanted to get his investment, was to just pitch myself as being somebody who could execute on it, and like and just like having the capability and a deep enough understanding of the space, and also like a willpower to do it. There's like a number of things that I did. Like yes, I built the initial product, but also like I did my own research on the space. I sent him like a summary of it, like what I learned and like how I thought about it and how I thought how his ideas fit into it. I also put out like a blog post called "Designing the Future of Research Publication," and I actually think if I were to speculate, that I think it was this blog post that actually secured the investment, because it was the day that I put out this blog post. He basically like signed the safe and like wired the money over right then. Um, and so it was basically like continuously trying to show that like I had the skills to execute on it. I was willing to actually put in the effort to do it. That I was able to like sell myself enough for him to be willing to give me a shot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's like small mechanics too, where like I structured the safe so that it would be a good deal for him. Like I think when you're talking to somebody with that much like political capital, so much reputation, so much weight, you kind of have to put in a lot of effort to like really sell them on it. Um, and yeah, those were like some of the things that I did to like really secure that.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any other lessons learned from this whole journey of like doing Scholar that come to mind that I think we haven't like mentioned here that would be important?
Just go after ambitious ideas. I mean, I literally had no background in scientific research. I had no idea what the fuck he was talking about. I saw this episode. I'm like, okay, he's done research for 10 years. He probably knows what the hell he's talking about, like at least like a rough idea. Um, I didn't know where it was gonna go. Um, it like maybe like seemed a little bit crazy for me to like think that I could work on something in this space that I basically had no understanding of. But like I mean I spent months like researching and like getting understanding of it in order to like develop that implicit or like that like personal conviction or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, like, if you see an opportunity and it's like a big opportunity, just like go tackle it. Like the cost for me was I literally just spent a week building a prototype and send it over, and it ended up going somewhere. Like there's probably like countless opportunities like that where you can just like put in a little bit of effort and like just really sell someone. Actually, something that popped into my head is like there's also this concept of permissionless apprentice. There's this guy named Jack Butcher, who is kind of big in like the Twitter sphere, like the NFT space. And he puts out a lot of like ideas that are meant to resonate with innovators. And he has this concept of like being a permissionless apprentice, where you just do something without asking for permission. And so like I kind of just like built it without asking for permission. And I think that actually like goes a long way in a lot of domains. Like whether you're trying to like sell a
That's well
product to
said.
somebody or like sell a specific individual on the value of yourself, like that's definitely like a good way to go about doing it. Yeah.
Shows confidence and initiative and
Yeah.
sort of all those things, right?
Yeah. Initiative is probably one of the bigger things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. As a closing question, I was going to ask you if you um, have any people that you've been inspired by. I'd imagine Balaji and working with Balaji has been one of those experiences for you.
Oh yeah, yeah. Balaji's definitely one. He's definitely shaped a lot of my thinking as well too. Elon is Elon, my boy. He's obviously somebody I really
Elon,
respect.
we
Um,
do love Elon.
yeah, I fucking love Elon. I know a lot of people like hate on him. Like, yeah, he does a lot of like controversial things. I don't give a fuck, honestly. Like, he does ambitious things. He really executes on them. Like, he's like really changing the world as an
He's like
individual.
one of the greatest builders of our time,
I think he's
not the
I think he's
greatest.
probably the greatest builder of all time, or one of the greatest. Yeah, probably the greatest builder of all time. That's obviously a very strong statement. But I think he's one of the few
He's
people who
definitely
you
up there.
could
Yeah.
like, yeah, call him that. Yeah, the Elon, Balaji, Naval has shaped a lot of my thinking. Um, basically all the big Twitter influencers.
The Twitter text, like
Yeah,
what is it, like this part of Twitter?
yeah,
Is that
yeah,
what people call
teapot.
it?
Yeah.
Teapot. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the pod.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm looking forward to all the other to the next episodes, subsequent episodes.
Well, yeah.
I think this will be pretty fun. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, man.